Hey, welcome back to Zombie Tactics. Let me apologize in advance here if I'm going to be doing a little bit of squinting. The sun is directly in my eyes, and I didn't want to wear sunglasses on a video of this nature because I didn't want to give anybody any ammo to say that I was trying to pretend like I was some kind of cool guy or something. The sun is in my eyes. I usually put my sunglasses on. Today I'm not, because for that reason. I don't want to give anybody any excuses to try and say I'm not taking this subject seriously, or I'm just using it to get attention, or to puff myself up or anything like that. The title of the video is, as you probably note from having clicked on it, is Stupid Gun Laws, A Tale of Two Cities. And as is probably obvious if you're watching this, it has to do with the subject of gun control, and particularly as inspired recently by the incident at the Sandy Hook Elementary School in Connecticut. And I'm taking the title of the video, A Tale of Two Cities, from the Charles Dickens novel of the same title for the following reasons, and this is why. And I'm not trying to just be clever. I always try to come up with ways to title these videos or have a subject in mind that ties in to the topic at hand. And here's why I'm choosing that title. The opening lines of that book, A Tale of Two Cities, you probably know them, you may have heard them. It's a famous quote, it's almost a cliche. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. And Dickens goes on to juxtapose a number of things. It was the age of darkness, it was the age of light, it was the age of belief, it was the age of disbelief, it was, all of these kinds of things. And I'm probably paraphrasing or misquoting part of it. Read it for yourself if you want to know the actual words. But the point that he was making in that opening lines of that book is the very point that I want to start out by making today, and that is that perspective and context always mean something. We have an issue like this come up because of a tragic incident, and depending upon how we look at it, things are one way or the other. And I don't want to make light of anything, and I don't want to take anything in stride or pretend that feelings and emotions aren't involved and that there's validity to those feelings and emotions, or to pretend that what happened in Sandy Hook is not important, because obviously it's important. Any time that people are killed, innocent people are killed, particularly the most innocent among us, young children, that's tremendously important, and we ought to do everything that we can to prevent an incident like that happening in the future, or making sure that the loss of life is as small as possible. I said partially the wrong thing. I don't think we should do everything we can. I think we should do everything that we can which can make a difference. Everything which is reasonable, which can make a difference. We could certainly eliminate school shootings altogether by just eliminating public schools and having people homeschooled, for instance. That's not a solution to the problem, although it would certainly eliminate school shootings. You understand what I'm saying? That's not a reasonable solution. It would end that particular problem. It would just end up causing a number of different other problems, and we don't want to live that way. The best of times, the worst of times. I find it interesting that on almost the same day that this tragic event happened, and I believe it was, December 14th, 2012, if you're watching this video sometime later. And this video was done January 1st, 2013, by the way, just to put things in reference. The same day that incident happened at the Sandy Hook Elementary School, there was a report that came out that showed that 2012 was the best year on record for the human race on planet Earth. That per capita, fewer people were starving to death, fewer people were dying from malnutrition or from preventable diseases, fewer people were living under tyrannical governments, and believe it or not, even with the wars that are going on around the world, fewer people were killed in armed conflict in 2012 than several years leading up to 2012, and that overall the condition of life on planet Earth for human beings is better than it's ever been. So in one sense, it is the best of times. But we see an incident like this in Connecticut, and we say, no, it's the worst of times, because 20-some-odd people, most of them school children, age 5, 6 years old, lost their lives senselessly because a madman decided to take up arms and shoot them for no good reason, had mental issues, had something going on. We don't know what. We don't know why. It's just sad, and that's our reaction to it. And our secondary reaction is to get mad, to get angry, to want to do something about it. So it is the best of times, it is the worst of times. Picking up on that theme, we know that the United States right now, where of course this happened, We have one of the lowest incidents of crimes that we've ever had in my memory since I've been alive. It's certainly crime rates for murder, for assault with a deadly weapon, for robbery, rape, burglary, everything. They are way down from what they were when I was born in the 1960s and the 1970s. They're down in some of those categories by as much as almost 70%. So in one sense, again, it's the best of times, even from the standpoint of gun crime or crime in general. In another sense, because something like this happens, it is the worst of times. It's a time that we have to sit back and think of who we are as a people and what we want to do about something like this. In the same sense that I'm talking about a tale of two cities and the best of times and the worst of times, I want to talk about two different mindsets, because I think that it is a clue to whether we want to actually prevent something like this happening in the future, or at least do everything that we reasonably can do to prevent something like this happening from the future, or whether we're just spinning our wheels and getting involved in all the same rhetoric and all the same arguments that we usually get involved in, and ultimately we're going to do nothing, or we're going to do a bunch of stuff that we already know isn't going to work. And either one of those two kinds of things, in my mind, is unacceptable. Because we have a tale of two mindsets going on here, too. And one mindset works like this. Something like this happens, and all everybody is thinking about is the guns, the guns, the guns. Oh, we have to get rid of guns. No, we don't need to get rid of guns. It's the Second Amendment. Oh, but we have to get rid of guns because guns were used. Yeah, but we have a Second Amendment right, and guns are used to prevent crime, and blah, blah, blah. And you see this kind of argument going on. And I'm not saying there isn't any value to that kind of line of argumentation, but it shows you that for a person thinking that way, the focus is not on the actual problem. The actual problem is innocent people being killed by criminal activity or by the activity of a deranged madman or terrorists or whoever it is. And we can find ample evidence that this kind of activity is not just related to guns. And if all you're worried about is, ooh, my Second Amendment rights, at the same time that you have a valid concern about that kind of thing, you're not really worried about the real problem either, which is innocents losing their lives under situations like this. The worst incident ever that happened at a school happened without the use of a firearm. So maybe we should leave guns out of this. Some of the worst terrorist incidents that have ever happened, which did in fact take the lives of small innocent children. Remember the Murrow building bombing by Timothy McVeigh. He used a rental truck, some legally purchased fertilizer, and some legally purchased fuel oil to create a massive bomb, blew up the entire face of a building. Something like 168 people lost their lives that day. And I think many of us remember the iconic picture of that fireman carrying out that small body and him crying, and we all cried with him. Because you can't help but cry about something like that. But what we ought to be focused about is not the means, the tools by which someone uses to enact some kind of a heinous agenda like that, to kill innocent people, whether they're adults or children, or whatever their agenda is, or whatever derangement has overtaken them. If we really want to be concerned about the problem is not fuel oil, and the problem is not Ryder trucks, and the problem is not a gallon of gasoline that was used to firebomb the Happy Whatever dance club, where many, many more people lost their lives than in this incident. And the problem isn't airliners, and the problem isn't, box cutters, which is what was used for the 9/11 attack and the falling of the Twin Towers, where thousands of people lost their lives, many of them children, far more than 20. See, if we want to get caught up in those kinds of particulars, we are not being fair to the question. We are not being fair to the problem. We have to say to ourselves, what is the real problem? The problem is crime and violence. And how do we reduce the rate of crime and violence? Now, I don't want to say there isn't anything that we can do about it. I'm not going to say that there isn't anything that we can do about guns that might make a difference. What I am going to say to you is that if that's the only thing that you're thinking about is the guns, you aren't thinking about the problem. All you're doing is you're getting caught up in your political stance, and you're looking to use this event as some way to push your agenda. Now, I know for a fact that this is what the people who are like Dianne Feinstein are going to do, because they've made it clear they were just waiting for the right event. Dianne Feinstein's team has been working on assault weapons ban litigation for years. And she's publicly stated that if she could get away with it, she would ban all guns. And it had nothing to do with this incident. She already had the legislation waiting for this, and she's said that she's going to introduce it in the Senate on January 3rd, and we'll see if that happens or not. But the point is, these political figures who can't get anything done about anything, all of a sudden something like this happens, and they've got a ready-made piece of legislation about guns. Why? Because guns were involved. Well, I get the feeling that if the school was firebombed, or there was a ready-made, there wouldn't be a ready-made anti-firebombing legislation. I get the impression that if a Ryder truck was used and they pulled up here and detonated a large bomb and blew up that school and killed more people, that we wouldn't have ready regulation, outlawing Ryder trucks or regulating things like that. So I have to say that this incident is not the cause of that legislation. No, this was a political move that was planned and decided well in advance, just looking for the right incident to take advantage of it. In other words, to cynically sit by and wait and do nothing and just wait for people to be killed and say, oh, see, now I can use this as an emotional lever to get what I wanted done all along. And I wanted to do it all along for reasons having nothing to do with this incident. Why do I know it had nothing to do with this incident? Because this incident had nothing to do with me forming this legislation. This legislation, the legislation that Dianne Feinstein and others like her are likely to introduce, is formed well in advance. You see, it's a cynical attempt to simply use a tragic event for political advantage. We're not focusing on the problem, which is protecting our children. We're focusing on just, how can I get my way? How can I leverage this tragic event to get my way, to push things through while people aren't looking, while people are emotionally, wound up. Fear is a powerful weapon. Sadness is a powerful weapon, and it's being used to strip people of their rights, just as the 9/11 event was used to strip us partially of our rights. We can't allow that kind of thing to continue, and part of what we have to begin insisting upon is that we really focus on the problem. If the problem is crime, if the problem is protecting our children, if the problem is reducing the number of times an incident like this happens, or preventing an incident like this taking a number of lives, then we have to start taking a look at that. Whether it's guns, whether it's bombs, whether it's gasoline, whether it's poison gas, whether it's somebody running into a school and hacking up kids with a meat cleaver. As happened on the same day in China, 22 kids were hacked darn near to death. Now, I know some people will come along and say, well, yeah, but none of them were killed. Yeah, none of them were killed, but they had ears cut off, noses cut off, terribly disfigured. Some of them are missing hands. Some of them are missing fingers. To say that that's not a tragedy, or to say that somehow it doesn't count because nobody lost their life, I'm sorry, you're being a little bit cynical, and I don't understand your sense of humanity. If you can shrug off 22 kids in China getting nearly hacked to death and say, oh, well, that's okay, or it's not as bad because they didn't lose their life. It's a tragedy by any sense of the imagination. And it was only, less than a year earlier where children were actually killed in knife attacks in schools in China. And the Chinese government had noted that there was such a rash of them occurring that they were actually trying to put the lid on those incidents and make sure that they didn't get reported outside of China. So we may not know how many of those things have ever happened. Certainly it didn't take a gun to inflict incredible trauma and tragedy upon those school children in China. So again, focusing on the gun isn't the problem. Focusing on a meat cleaver or a knife is not the problem. The tool is not the problem. What do I think we can do? Well, if we know the problem isn't the gun, let's stop talking about the gun. Let's start talking about the deranged individuals that do this kind of thing. We can go back to previous administrations. We can go back to the 1970s, where all kinds of people who were sort of do-gooders and said, oh, we want to make sure that people who have mental problems, their civil rights are not being, abridged or taken away from them. It used to be far, far easier to say, well, here's a person with severe mental difficulties. We can either institutionalize them or we can force them to be medicated. And I understand forcing somebody to be medicated is a terrible thing to have to do to somebody. But if somebody's kind of off their nut a little bit, and I'm not trying to be flippant, that's not really losing your rights. We're already a person who's mentally incompetent. I know of people who are related to friends of mine. I have a relative in my own family who is not really quite altogether mentally, and it is darn near impossible to force that person to take their medication because the law says no, they have their rights. As long as they're not actually hurting somebody, it doesn't matter if they're wandering around deranged talking about murdering people. Until they actually do something, well, whatever. Maybe they're going to be a homeless person on the street. It's no big deal. We can't do anything about it. We have to change that perception. A person who is not able to take care of themselves, by definition, doesn't have the same rights that other people we do. We don't extend the same rights to small children that we do adults, even though they're human rights. We don't say that they have an absolute right to everything the same way that we do. We don't let them vote. We don't let them drive cars. We don't let small children have firearms. Those are reasonable things. We don't let small children run around with guns. We don't let small children run around with knives. We don't let them play with gasoline and matches. Why we cannot treat people with mental problems the same way, I think reveals, again, that people don't want to focus on the problem. They're in a world where they're focusing on a whole range of issues that has nothing to do with really solving problems. They're looking only to make political effect their goal. They think that they are protecting freedom by protecting the rights of mentally deranged people to walk among us who may go off their nut someday, steal some guns, get some guns somewhere, get a firebomb, make one out of a gallon of gasoline and a couple of matches. Start hacking up people with a knife that they steal from the local Target. That's the beginning of a problem, that's the beginning of solving this problem, is to improve our mental health services and the way that we treat people with mental problems. We can no longer labor under the luxury of thinking that, it's okay to just let them wander out there on their own, muttering to themselves about how the world is so unfair to them and how someday you'll all pay. That's got to change. That's going to do more to prevent a kind of incident like this happening in the future than any gun ban, than any ban on fertilizer in trucks. And how do we know this? We know that because we know that these incidents are as rare as getting hit by lightning. And even though they're as rare as getting hit by lightning, what do? We react to this thing that's as rare as getting hit by lightning. You know what? You're not going to get... The chances of you getting shot with an assault rifle are less than they are of getting stabbed to death. 4 times as many people are stabbed to death with knives every year than are shot with rifles. More people are beaten with baseball bats to death than are shot with rifles and killed. More people are killed by being beaten or strangled by someone's bare hands every year than they are by assault rifles. Yet we want to ban or limit assault rifles. How does that make any sense? If we really want to solve the problem, we're focusing on the wrong end of it, aren't we? And people play games with these statistics. I threw some statistics out there for you. There will be many links in the comments section, the description for this video, and I'm probably going to add some in the coming weeks to this video as time goes by to just show you over and over and over and over again how guns are not the problem, but yet people want to focus on the guns. People will make up statistics, and there's a couple of videos that I'll be linking in particular here showing you how people lie with statistics. Dianne Feinstein, you go on her website, and the number one thing that she cites is, wow, look at this, assault weapons bans can make such a great difference. She notes that the original assault weapons ban that was passed in 1994 and has since expired, that it did such an incredibly great job of reducing crime. And what does it say on her website? It says that it proved conclusively that it did a great job of reducing crime because it reduced crime by, I think it reduced gun crime by 6.9%. And you can check her website, and you can check what I'm about to say. And whatever I say, whether I get it right or wrong, you'll be able to check the links that I give you, and you'll be able to correct it for yourself. But even the very people that did that study, the very number one thing that she uses to prove her case why we need, again, to have another assault weapons ban, the people that did the study said, no, it didn't say anything like that at all. What we said was, We can't prove one thing one way or the other, whether the assault weapons ban made a difference. We don't know. The study's inconclusive. We don't have enough data. But the very best you could possibly imagine, if you kind of squint sideways and looked at the data cross-eyed, you could possibly pretend that something like 6% difference in crime was made. And I'm saying, really, 6%? You want to take away everybody's guns, and make no mistake, that is what we're talking about, is taking away everybody's guns. And you want to say you're going to get a problem that's 94% as bad as it was before. You want to violate everybody's Second Amendment rights. In some cases, you want to violate their First Amendment rights and other rights as well. And the best you can say is you got a 6% difference. So you've got 94% as much of a problem as you had before. And that is the best statistic she can give. Meanwhile, we've got case after case after case where we can show that even though the United States has 300 million guns in it, we have less crime in the United States than we do in Great Britain, by far. I know some of you just freaked out. You're going to go, whoa, 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 no, wait a minute. Only this many people were shot by guns in Great Britain or the UK, and in the United States, this many people were shot by guns, in the United States. So you're wrong. Crime is lower in Great Britain than it is in the United States. Au contraire, mon frère. And I know that's French, and I'm getting to the French in a second. But, see, here again, you're acting like all we have to do is focus in on the guns, because the guns are the whole problem. The only problem is guns, and the only problem is gun crime. You take away the guns, and in that vacuum comes sweetness and light, and everything is perfect, right? I know that's how some of you think. But that's wrong. Because the UK's own studies by politicians, and by the European Union, and by the United Nations themselves show that there is a 3.5, that violent crime in the UK is 3.5 times greater, almost actually 4 times greater in the UK than it is in the United States. And this is a country that has all but banned guns. Sure, gun crime is lower, but people are being killed with knives. People are being beaten to death with pipes. People are being raped and murdered and put in the hospital and, robbed, and home invasions and all of this stuff. There will be a link down in the comments section, and it'll show you that actually the UK is the most violent society on the face of the planet right now, so far as, first world countries are concerned. Whereas the United States, it's not even in the top 10. France, I think, is number 10, and there's a whole bunch of countries in between, like Belgium and Luxembourg, places that you'd think would be absolute bastions of idyllic life with no crime whatsoever, where the crime rate is actually higher per capita than it is in the United States. So if getting rid of guns fixes the problem, I want you to explain to me how. Sure, it might reduce the number of gun crimes, but in that vacuum comes knives and other things that kill people and maim people and hurt people just as much. We know that, for instance, as many times as people are hurt with guns in the United States, that people have their lives defended thousands of times more. Conservative estimates place the number of times that someone defends themselves with a gun and prevents a crime like a rape, like a murder, like an assault with a deadly weapon, like an aggravated assault, like a robbery, a kidnapping, something like that. All of these horrible violent crimes, the number of times that someone defends themselves with a firearm in the United States is somewhere between 1 million and 2.5 million times a year. Pick your study. Even the very most conservative study showed that, at minimum, in the United States, people defend themselves hundreds of thousands of times a year with a firearm to prevent themselves from being killed, from being raped, from being kidnapped, from being robbed. If you take away the guns, you have to say, all right, we're going to prevent some of these gun crimes, but all of these other crimes now are going to happen. The cases where people would defend themselves. You can't pretend as though you create a vacuum by taking away one part of the problem and that vacuum doesn't get filled with something just as bad. I thought about doing a video entitled The Prince and the Mice and the Cheese, based on a children's story. And the children's story went up something like this, that there was a prince and he was complaining because there were mice in the palace. And the royal smart person came in and said, oh, well, that's great, you just get some cats. So you bring in the cats. Now the cats are gone. Now the mice are gone, but now you've got cats peeing and pooping all over the place. How do you get rid of the cats? Well, you bring in some dogs. You see where this is going, and in variations of this story, all you do is you keep making the problem worse and worse, actually, by trying to fix the problem that you've already got. If you have a problem with mice, the problem is with the mice. You don't just find a way to get rid of the mice and pretend that you don't create any other problems on top of it. If you get rid of all the guns in the United States, or you get rid of the guns that people want to get rid of, which is almost all the guns in the United States, you just create another kind of problem. And again, it shows that if all you're doing is focusing on the guns, we're into that tale of two cities thing again. What are you worried about? You worried about guns? Are you worried about people losing their lives? If you want to protect children, let's talk about ways to protect children. And we know that just getting rid of guns isn't going to do it. There'll be plenty of links in the comments section, the description section for this video, for you to read and to prove that point to yourself, because I don't think that some guy doing a 30-minute video on YouTube is going to change your mind about it if you're on the opposite side of this question. So what I implore you to do is, regardless of what side of this question you're on, stop worrying about the guns. Guns ought to be off the table, because guns are not the problem. The problem is people getting killed. If guns are off the table, if guns are gone, people will be killed in other ways. We'll just have this tragedy presenting itself a different way in the future. Let's concentrate on the problem. Let's fix the problem, and not just some tertiary, secondary element like the tool used to do it. That's Zombie Tactics for today, and I'll be talking more about this in the coming weeks. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.